Good day, guys. I wanted to cover the topic of when a friendship or some form of relationship with a person gets to a point where you decide that you're going to cut ties with that person. And something I've noticed through that process that it took me several years to kind of figure this out and synthesize those experiences. But there's a point to be made on kind of what happens when you decide to cut ties with someone because they've crossed a certain line with you, or you just don't think you want to be friends with them, or if it's a former relationship partner or someone that's about to be a former relationship partner, kind of what happens immediately thereafter after you've decided to cut ties with someone. So, whenever you do decide to cut ties with people in your life, it's sometimes the case that you'll get a hostile response from that person, right? This is not necessarily a bad thing, though, even though it may seem like it. Because what that does is it helps to basically inform you of where that person stands with you to begin with. So, regardless of the details of what happened, typically it's not something, at least for me, that you decide overnight, right? This person has kind of let you down in the past, or maybe some sort of major thing happened all at once, but it's a significant event where that person pretty much didn't do what you thought they were going to do, right? They weren't supportive of you in any way. They actually did something against you that was underhanded, or they lied to you, or they stole, whatever the case may be. Or you just, after a certain period of time of being friends with that person, maybe you just think that you've outgrown dealing with them because of things that you've learned in life. You don't want to have an association. Maybe they are a habitual drug user or something, and you used to be okay with having someone like that in your life. And as you've figured out, you know what? That's probably not something I want to have anything to do with. And I'm not talking about marijuana or something. I'm talking about, drugs that are potentially immediately lethal or really bad for you, or really affect your circumstances if you would be involved in that in an immediate way, potentially. And you just decide to cut ties, regardless of what the reason is. If they react in a hostile way to you, that actually confirms that your initial decision is correct. If someone wanted to have a positive place in your life in some form, they would react in a completely different way instead of trying to attack you. In essence, the reason for you making the initial decision is affirmed through this process. So, I'm not necessarily talking about physically attacking you, although it could take that form. It's pretty obvious if you say, well, I don't want to deal with you anymore, and then that person tries to beat the shit out of you, that they're not really your friend. Sometimes it's like people get mixed messages and stuff from that, but that's pretty clear and straightforward. But even cases where it's like that person just curses you out, or they tell you, you ain't worth nothing anyway, you SOB, or you're not a good man anyhow, you're not a good friend either, I don't want to have anything to do with you. Even though your best bet, of course, is to just extract yourself from that situation, right? Your best bet is to continue with your plan to not deal with that person anymore in your own personal life, right? You can kind of smile on the inside if that happens. And I learned that, like I say, through having situations like that over the years where I used to be like, man, why is this person doing this? You'd think that they would be sad or upset more than they'd just be pissed off or trying to, create drama or whatever. But now, to me, when I experience that, I realize that's because I've made the right decision, right? I can be confident that my decision is correct to cut this person out of my life, because if they were really on my team, people that are on your team in life, they will want to repair any animosity or ill will that they have in relation to you. If that's what happens, then you may want to reconsider your decision, because if you make that choice, and this is another thing I've learned, although that's not the primary focus in what I'm trying to say here, is that once you decide that you're going to cut someone out, you have to completely do it, right? There can be maybe an exception to that, but I personally have never had a positive situation where, whether it was my ex-girlfriend in the past or just former friends, men or women, where I've cut someone out and then tried to be friends with them again later and had any sort of positive outcome with that. It's always been negative. Like I say, that's sort of another point to make on this, but that's not the main point that I'm trying to make here. My point is, if they don't attack you and they actually want to still be your friend, or they offer to try to make something up with for you or whatever, then it's up to your discretion whether that line's still been crossed or not. I would say that once you've made the final decision, though, never go back to allowing someone back into your life on those terms, because that never works. But my main point is, if they don't do that, if they're not like, well, wait a second, what's going on here? I want to be your friend, or I still want to make something up to you, or whatever the case may be, if they react in a hostile way, that's instantly confirming your decision. It confirms that this person's not someone that's on your team in life. They don't care about your better interests. They're trying to attack you, or they're attacking you now because this is how they've always felt. It's only now that the chips are down, now that you've called them out, that they're actually going to show their true colors. That's a good way of putting it, I think. They're showing their true colors when they do this. And so when someone gives you an outright hostile reaction after deciding to cut ties with them, and sometimes, of course, you're not going to say, I cut ties with you now. You might just ghost them or whatever. And even then, you can assess their reaction. Do they not say anything about it? Because if so, they're probably not your friend, right? If they question you and try to say, what happened to you, and you decide to respond and you just tell them the truth, like, hey, you did this and that, or here's where I felt things were, and I decided that I just was going to cut ties with you, and I feel like that's the right decision. Again, if they decide, well, I'm going to attack you now in some form or fashion, you made the right choice, because someone that actually cares about you isn't going to do those things. Or, I guess, is sort of a counter argument almost, or an attempt to make another excuse, basically. They could just be making an emotional response. It's like they're pissed off because of your decision, but they could say, well, you just pissed me off. I don't really feel that way. But then why do you want to be friends with someone that's that emotionally unstable, right? Women especially might try to do that. They try to say, oh, I was just being emotional because I was angry with you. Well, that's nice, but you still cursed me out, or you still tried to get physical in a violent way, or whatever the case might have been. And this just confirms to me that I'm not dealing with you. You can say that to yourself. I would say that if they've attacked you or whatever, they've already confirmed your choice, right? To cut ties with them, just ghost them from that point. This is especially important in the context of male-female interactions, right? If it's a woman, you want to record everything she says. You want to keep any messages or whatever at that point. But once you've crossed that line, especially after they've confirmed it, where you're not wanting to deal with them anymore, just you can record your messages and stuff. If it's another guy, you probably don't need to worry about it so much. But that, again, if they've reacted in that kind of hostile way, that just confirms that you're making the right choice. And that's the main point I want to make, guys. Don't feel bad. Don't try to explain yourself any further, because I used to do that kind of stuff in the past when I'd have these situations come along with people. It's the wrong choice to do that. All you have to do is just smile, even if it's just not actually being expressed, but in your mind, you just say, yep, this is someone I don't need to deal with. This is someone that almost certainly always had these sort of hostile, these sort of antagonistic views, and was just pretending to be my friend. And this just confirms that. And then you cut ties with that person completely, and you never deal with them again. As much as you can, right? If you work with that person, you can kind of ascertain whether you want to get another job or not, whether it's worth doing that. If you have kids with this person, then you may still have to deal with that person with co-parenting or whatever. I recommend not having children today if you're a guy in a Western culture. But that's a topic that I've discussed many times, and that's pretty common in the manosphere. I don't think I need to reiterate and hash through all that again. But the point is, if someone has a hostile reaction to you saying, you know what, whether you overtly say it or not, just cutting ties with that person, and they get pissed off and they get super emotional, not just because they're upset, but because they actually feel entitled to what you should do for them, or they just tell you you ain't shit anyway. Why should I care? You're not a good friend. Okay, fine. It's actually a positive response when they say something like that, because it confirms the choice that you're making. My opinion is that you should just generally try to keep those kinds of people out of your life, because they're not on your team to begin with, and it doesn't matter what they say beyond that point. Again, I would recommend that if you've made the final choice on that, in terms of cutting ties, don't let that person back into your personal life ever. Maybe there's an exception to that somehow, but I've never had a good experience doing that in the past. But if in that moment they actually are upset or they want to know what's wrong or they want to try to work things out, then you can consider that based on whether you think they're being genuine or not. But if they have that kind of hostile response instead, that confirms your decision to kick them out. Don't feel bad about it. Don't try to explain yourself. Don't try to, defend yourself unless they're physically attacking you, right? But don't try to defend yourself by arguing with them. Don't waste your time. Realize that this just affirms the choice that you've made. It confirms your decision, and walk away from these kinds of people because they're not your friends in the first place. And unless you're forced to, you don't really need to deal with them anymore, and you're better off moving on from those sort of connections and associations with people.